Xiaomi just announced this phone this week, and I gotta say, September isn't letting up, and smartphone manufacturers are just coming out with so many great devices, and this one's pretty next level. Let me tell you why. Now, I've been using the Xiaomi Mi 10T Pro for the past week, and at first glance, I thought it looked way too similar to the Poco X3 that I just checked out recently. But that's not a bad thing. I thought the X3 looked really good minus the big Poco signature in the back, but the Mi 10T Pro looks a little bit different from the back. You don't have a huge signature branding, and the camera module is a lot smaller and offset to the left. The top and the bottom of the device is also a little bit more squared off, which I like better, but the sides are still slightly rounded, so I wish they would have just squared off all the sides to make that design a lot different and more unified. Now, there's a fingerprint reader which also doubles as the power button on the right side, and just like the Poco X3, I found it to just be okay. It's not the fastest that I've used, but it still works well. Now, before we move on to my overall experience with this phone, let's quickly go over its specs. The Mi 10T Pro is using Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 with the Adreno 650 GPU. There's also 8GB of LPDDR5 RAM, 128 or 256 gigs of UFS 3.1 storage, a whopping 5000 mAh battery, a triple camera setup with a 108 megapixel main camera, 13 megapixel ultra wide, and a 5 megapixel macro sensor, which I know we all don't need nor use on a daily basis, but it's still here. Now, probably the most killer part of this phone here is the 144Hz adaptive sync display. So the display itself is a 6.67-inch full HD display, which features that crazy fast 144Hz refresh rate. This is the first phone that I've used with the 144Hz refresh rate, and to be quite honest, I can't really tell the difference between 120Hz to 144Hz. Even when I'm playing games or scrolling through Twitter or on Chrome, I personally can't tell the difference. Now, when I put the display to 90Hz, I can tell there's slightly more motion blur when scrolling really quickly, and going back to 60Hz, you can definitely tell there's some sort of input lag or motion lag between each swipe. Now, like it says on a phone, if you want a good middle ground for battery life but also really smooth experience, set the display to 90Hz and call it a day. But if you want the maximum performance and the absolute best display, go for the 144Hz refresh rate. You'll get less input lag and less motion blur when scrolling through apps, but you may take a hit on battery life depending on how you use your phone. And speaking of battery life, there's that 5000 mAh battery inside this phone. Even with a 144Hz display, I was able to get around 7 hours of screen on time before I had to recharge the phone. Now, obviously, this depends on how heavy you use your phone and what apps you use on a daily basis, but surprisingly, the phone held up really well during heavy gaming sessions. The only downside, in my opinion, is the lack of wireless charging. I'm the type of person who relies heavily on wireless charging, whether I'm in my car, at the office, or at home. I usually charge my smartphones via a wireless charger, so that's a little disappointing not seeing one here. Now, when it comes to performance and day-to-day usage, it's like any modern flagship Android device. If you've ever used the OnePlus 8 Pro, S20 Ultra, or even the Find X2 Pro from Oppo, this phone runs like a champ. The Snapdragon 865 and 8 gigs of RAM is plenty for day-to-day usage and heavy intensive apps, plus paired with MIUI 12, which is based off of Android 10, the overall experience has been really good. Like I mentioned in my Poco X3 video, the fact that it comes with all the Google apps pre-installed and how light MIUI is gives users a really fast user experience that's really enjoyable to use. There were some Xiaomi apps that came pre-installed, but you can easily hide those apps or delete them altogether if you want. The triple camera setup on the back are pretty good in my opinion. Like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, having a macro sensor is kind of pointless. I would much rather have an actual 2x telephoto lens or some sort of crazy 30x tele lens versus a macro sensor. But anyways, the photos that I shot with the Mi 10T Pro are great. In very bright environments or in well-lit places, you can get some amazing shots from this phone. Colors were accurate, not oversaturated like some phones that I've tested recently, but overall it's great. Now, one feature I'm not a fan of here is the auto HDR. I feel like it's a little bit too processed for my liking, which gives the overall photo a more flat and two-dimensional look to them. So if you want a photo that you can quickly share on social, I would recommend turning off HDR altogether if you're not a fan. In low light, I guess I might have just been spoiled by the Pixel's low light performance, but it just can't compete. There's noticeable noise in the darker areas, and colors can get muddy, especially in extreme low light situations, even with night mode turned on. Also, the shooting experience is really slow, and and it's really hard to nail focus at night. Now when it comes to that 108 megapixel sensor, which is a big selling point for this phone, it's great. As you can see in the sample shots, when you zoom in, you can see more details in your shots, which is exactly what this is meant for. Realistically though, you wouldn't want to use 108 megapixel mode every single time you take a photo for a couple of reasons. One, it takes up way more storage than a regular photo, and two, there's a slight lag in between shots for photos to be processed and when you want to view the photo right away. But other than that, I would only use this if I wanted to print out that image versus just posting it on social. And yeah, that's pretty much all you need to know about the Xiaomi Mi 10T Pro. For around $800 in the US, it's a pretty strong competitor that can very well compete with OnePlus and Samsung. It has great battery life, the 144Hz display is amazing and technically faster than any flagships that I've checked out in the past, and the 108 megapixel sensor isn't gimmicky at all and actually works. If you're in another region like Asia or Europe, there's so many options to choose from that it can be a bit overwhelming. So what I would suggest you do is really figure out which brand you like better and figure out which software you prefer to use, because at the end of the day, most of these modern flagship phones all perform the same. The only difference you'll notice in the long run is the software it's running and how many major updates you'll receive. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this quick video. Let me know in the comment section down below what phone you want me to check out next, and yeah, I'll see you all in the next one.